Thank you all for being here. We are aware that we are between all of us and lunch, so please bear with us for some time. But I think the session is going to be pretty interesting. The topic is really about ransomware. That's a problem that almost everybody across the world is facing today. As the world was grappling with the challenges of 2020, which is majorly the pandemic situation, 2021 also brought about its own challenges, like the SolarWinds attack, the Log4j vulnerabilities and stuff like that. But while all of this was happening, one of the things that really started picking up was ransomware, right? Gradually it started increasing. So if you see in the year 2021, there was a 105% increase in the ransomware attacks globally, right? And in particular, if you talk about Philippines, there was a good 69% of the organizations were affected by ransomware. And I think that's where the panelists that we have come across from various industry verticals, and we would really like to touch upon this subject on what was their experience during the pandemic, how did they deal with it, and what was their countermeasure to how would they really look at it. As an introduction, I am Harshavardhan Lale. I am the Vice President with ARCON. ARCON is a company which specializes in the identity domain. So we have tools like privileged access management, endpoint privilege management, and a bunch of other things around that. To quickly introduce the panelist here, Edison. Mr. Edison, he's currently working as an IT director with Manila Doctors Hospital. He was also the vice president for ICT at Makati Medical Center, and he has more than 30 years of experience in the information technology, information systems, and internal audits. He is also, he has a degree in business management, and he's also a CISA from Misaka. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Then we have Ms. Justine. She is the Deputy CISO for Bayad, who oversees and provides guidance to the cybersecurity departments to ensure its smooth working. She was recognized by Women in Security Alliance Philippines as one of the top women in Security Philippines last 2020. Then we have Mr. Ashley, or ACE as people call him. He is currently the National President of the Philippines Institute of Cybersecurity Professionals. He is also currently Assistant Vice President for Cybersecurity Strategy at Smart Communications. He previously served in the government as Air Force Combat Helicopter Pilot. Thank you for being here. And last is Mr. Dennis. He is the ICT head for AirAsia. He has 30 years of experience and he's held various roles across different industry verticals, and he's very passionate for technology. So thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate that. I'm sure that the audience here is going to gain a lot of insights from what we're going to discuss. So I think to start with Edison, you come from a very, important industry vertical which was in peak of action during the COVID times, right, for the hospital that you were managing. So I'm very curious, and I'm sure the people sitting here are very curious to know why the hospital was grappling with the COVID situation, right? And I'm sure there was a horde of people coming in, and there was a lot of service that was being offered. And predominantly the medical sector is not so very IT savvy, if I were to put it. So how were you really able to manage both the operations as well as manage the IT side and ensure that things like ransomware don't hit you at that time, because anything of that sort happening during the pandemic would have created a big chaos in the country.
True. Yeah, I guess like healthcare industry in the Philippines is maybe the youngest as far as the industry, as far as adapting technology, right? Because it's only recent that the healthcare, the hospitals started shifting to digital. And that's exactly right. In 2020, when COVID really struck, I mean, a lot of the doctors wanted to have remote access, even us in IT were basically really important at that time, because we wanted as well to protect the frontliners by deploying technology like CCTV. And a lot of remote access were also asked, even releasing the medical records. And that's the problem is, given that healthcare, the doctors are not really trained, unlike in a corporate world wherein we have a protocol about following governance. In healthcare, the clinicians primarily focus on treating the patients. They don't care about security, they don't care about cybersecurity, they care more of this patient safety. And that's where the problem actually started kicking in. They wanted technology to like be launched, to deploy. They required IT, basically all of us IT to really come up with strategy to how to make it accessible, not only for the doctors but as well to the patients. And this is where probably governance and the right training skilled of IT professionals will come in, especially being exposed and trained to this security portion of the IT. I did a lot of scanning, of course, the network scan first. I did a lot of governance, education, basically like what the previous speakers mentioned, user awareness. And that's more or less how I started like deploying solutions. Of course, with the end in mind that the security, the confidentiality, more so with the Data Privacy Act now in place, I was like really cautious and at the same time conscious every time I deployed solutions. And I guess the doctors and as well as the nurses appreciated that. We just have to like really be straight to the point to them that we can allow you to have access, but we need some controls in place. And I'm really glad that the National Privacy Commission is actually the governing body here in the Philippines that I really use as far as explaining to all the users, to all the doctors, to all the clinicians that we can provide access, but with level of controls and privacy.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that, Edison. Coming to you, Justine, I'm sure remote working was a norm during the pandemic period, right? And you're coming from a financial sector, giving people that access to work from home because, earlier they were in a controlled environment, so to say, but then they were working from home. So what were the challenges that you faced and how were you really looking at, because working from home is one of the very peculiar cases for a ransomware attack, right? Because then people are accessing everything. They are out of the boundaries of your control. So how did you guys really manage the situation there?
Actually, on our end for Bayad, given that, like you mentioned, right, the pandemic happened, so we had to provision our users with remote accesses through VPN and really limiting accesses within our Bayad network. So what we did was actually implement the multi-factor authentication on our VPNs to ensure that they have a second layer of authentication to be able to limit those accesses. And on top of that, of course, access management has always been one of our priorities to ensure that we do limit, we provide less privileges of access. There are segregation of duties. More so, we actually follow the defend forward strategy. So we ensure that zero trust is there, defense in depth is there. And then another thing that we actually struggled with was the shortage of the laptops or the workstations.
Yeah.
And so there are users that actually use BYODs. So that is actually another struggle. So we just ensure that we input or we ensure that there are still security solutions like AVs, the typical AVs, the SIEM solution, we have those in place to actually be able to monitor those activities that they are doing. So that's how we handle the pandemic.
Interesting. Thanks for that. Ace, coming to you, you're working with the telecom sector and you're also leading in the cybersecurity domain. So how would you really describe the current threat landscape, specific to ransomware?
Okay, it's very interesting. For each cyber threat report that all of you read, you either read that ransomware has vaulted to the top 5, top 3, if not the top cyber threat. And based on experience, that is grounded on fact. Let us establish that as a starter. Now, ransomware, of course, has benefited also from other similar developments in the technology field, which I will explain later. Now, ransomware has to be contextualized in the overall cybercrime ecosystem.
Right.
Cybercrime, of course, as you all know, has become very, very lucrative. Just last year, it has reached, if it were a country, it has reached a top 3 ranking.
Yes.
Third only to the US and to China. So that means there is a lot of incentive to be in cybercrime. And corollary to that, cybercrime groups have actually started to disaggregate and to specialize in ransomware. So they're not just your run-of-the-mill cybercrime group doing all sorts of things. They've actually started to specialize, which tells you these types of attacks have become more and more complicated and sophisticated. As a matter of fact, you can even analyze it as an industry from both the criminal perspective as well as the victim side perspective. It has actually become a disaggregated industry, which tells you, you have to treat this as a very, very serious issue. Now, having said that, Cybersecurity Ventures, one of those, keeping tabs on this development, has projected a 15% increase in the next 3 years. So from a 6 trillion criminal enterprise, which has already surpassed the illegal drug trade by so many trillions of dollars, it will still grow another 15% in the next 3 years from 6 trillion to 10.5 trillion, which tells you there will be more and more ransomware groups. Look, the FBI says there are at least 100 of these ransomware variant criminal groups. And how many are they able to shut down? The US just shut down the one that was responsible for the Colonial Pipeline attack. They just shut it down, but they basically just rebranded and regrouped, right?
Absolutely.
The Netherlands just shut down another one. So that's the rate of what? 1 a year per country? And you're talking about hundreds of ransomware groups. So if you look at it from that perspective, this is a very, very major issue, even from looking at it from the threat landscape, Harsh.
I totally agree with you because while I was reading the SOFO's report, right, it said, in fact, the ransom that people are paying for ransomware has also gone up. I was reading that CNA Financials actually paid close to $40 million in ransom, right, which is huge. And in fact, the same report suggests that even in Philippines, organizations have paid to the tunes of average $1.6 million to the attackers, which is pretty crazy, right? And a very difficult situation to be in. Coming to Dennis, you come from a very unique industry, again, the aviation industry. So as I understand from you, 85% of your infrastructure is sitting in the cloud, right? So because it is sitting in the cloud and users are working from home, the access was almost outside of your control. So how did you really ensure that you regulated the user access for your employees?
Well, actually, for us, actually, we're, as you said, we're already mostly on the cloud system. We have a lot of SaaS already. So we don't, most of the on-premise systems, we have our legacy system. We have our own security team that streamline and protect those systems against ransomware. But then there's also a threat of getting data from our SaaS systems. Okay, for us actually, it's really more on the user education. So we really have to campaign to the users regarding security awareness. We have regular security awareness training that we conduct to our users. Endpoint protection has to be employed. We had bring your own device policy, but then we have to do another layer in terms of trusted devices to access our own network on our systems. But at the end of the day, it's really about user education. They have to be aware that what they're accessing, their emails, their phishing attacks, and even those trusted access to the system, they should be aware that they are trusted, and they should be aware in terms of what are the attacks that can happen on the user side.
Great. So you mentioned about a very good term, which is endpoint protection, right? So endpoint protection happens in multiple ways, which is one from an antivirus perspective, a malware perspective, and the other is from the access side. So which of these are you really investing in? What's the thought process there?
Well, at the endpoint protection, there are your common antivirus, your common identity management, two-factor authentication. You can employ a lot of them, but at the end of the day, if the user can bypass already, because the user is an authorized user, but then there's a Trojan waiting on his device, not our own device, then the threat can happen anywhere.
Exactly. So ARCON, for that matter, has a product which is called Endpoint Privilege Management, and that can actually help you in controlling the ransomware attacks in multiple ways. You know, one of the things is, say there is a payload that is coming with a file, right? If you try to open that, it can actually block it. You know, it can warn the user, it can block it, it can do a bunch of things there. So I believe the endpoint privilege management is also one of the good things that people sitting here can also look at and think about.
Yeah, even not just an endpoint protection, but the risk of data breach is there. So if even though there's no payload going to be uploaded to our systems, it's still that there's something running on the end user's device that can extract data and basically expose the company.
And Dennis, I'm sure that because you come from the airline industry, there is a lot of legacy application that you would be using. So how did you control the access to these legacy applications?
We're technically moving most of our legacy outside, going to the cloud or changing it to a new system. Right now, most of the legacy has only trusted users to access. We don't want to keep a lot of legacy systems moving forward.
Coming to Edison, you mentioned about extending it to the patients, right? So I'm sure earlier the records were not available to them via mobile or emails or through the internet, right? Now during the pandemic, you would have to make provisions for them to really use it and access it. So how do you really ensure that because this is sensitive, PII information, and we know that in fact in Philippines last year, SNR membership, a lot of data was leaked, right? Data exfiltration happens to be one of the important points or aspects of a ransomware. So how did you really ensure that this PII was safe and you could ensure or you could give that comfort level to your patients that their data was safe and nobody could really access that?
True. Just like what Dennis mentioned, in IT, we all know that when BYOD was like introduced to the IT industry, it's actually a nightmare for all IT. BYOD doesn't mean that, bring your own device, but for IT, you know what it means, right? Bring your own distraction. And that's basically our concern as well. A lot of doctors like bringing in as well. At the same time, we're very conscious about the DPA, the PII as well, protecting PII. This is the reason why I believe that we all have good IT personnel in place in our own offices. But the problem here is the discipline. They're good in operationalizing things, but when it comes to security, they still really overlook it. Just like when I got into Manila doctors, they had good IT, but the way they set it up, the controls are not there. When the demand for online access to medical records were really asked, what I did is basically to come up with a structure that my IT people then were not aware of. Of course, everyone is so particular and familiar with DMZ, but a lot of IT are not still familiar with that. So what I did was to really set it up. So should there be a breach, at least the affected data will be limited compared to the whole ecosystem of Manila doctors will be. So a lot of things are really still struggling right now, still ensuring. At the same time, yes, we do have logs, we do have endpoint protection, but are they really correlating all the logs? Are they reviewing the logs? No. There's our firewall had good reports, but are they really analyzing? It's just really still awareness. So it's not just basically the user that I'm really trying to educate, but my IT people as well. And I think everyone should still do it. And I'm glad we have this kind of conferences wherein to make everyone, whether it's in the security or in the IT, everyone's just being made aware that security is really important at this point in time when everything and anything is now being transformed digitally. One good thing about in the Philippines now, because of the layback on the healthcare industry, we're dominantly still paper-based. So that's why ransomware is not really that heavily impacted yet, except for, of course, the email or so. But as far as medical records, still paper. But my hospital and big tertiary hospitals have shifted already to electronic medical record. That's where actually the risks are. And that's why the IT, I should really recommend, should be really elevate their understanding, their appreciation, as well as their skills in combating and protecting the digital record of the hospital.
Interesting. So, Edison, I'm sure you would also be looking at compliances like HIPAA or the equivalents of that.
Yes.
How does that really help you in this security journey?
Yeah, given that, Philippines still paper-based, HIPAA is not yet like really a requirement here. But given that we have, again, the Data Privacy Act, the PIA, plus of course all the accrediting bodies, the ACI, the JCI, the PhilHealth, wherein security is actually still an essential item. So we're doing that. Unfortunately, DOH has really leveled up as far as directing and guiding all the healthcare industry when it comes to digitalizing the medical records. So again, I'm just glad that we finally have the DPA in place.
Lovely. Coming to Justine, I'm extending the same question that I asked Edison. Even for you, a lot of things would have changed from counter to digital, right? So how was that journey, and how did you really take care of the cyber security with that aspect?
Yeah, so for Bayad, I think like a lot of Filipinos know already, we started off as an over-the-counter bills payment platform. So given that, given the pandemic as well, I think we shifted to digital, meaning we actually have our own mobile application already and our Bayad Online for online bills payment platform. So in order to ensure that security is actually built in when we deploy these applications in our production environment, we actually ensure that SSDLC is actually in place. So at every stage of the development cycle, we actually incorporate security controls already. So by doing security design reviews, we ensure that at the conceptualization phase of the project, the different security controls are already in place there. And then eventually, afterwards, we also ensure that we do vulnerability assessment and penetration testing to be able to identify certain weaknesses and vulnerabilities that might have still be in place even after the design review. And then for afterwards, we also do like user awareness to our employees, even doing crisis simulation to ensure that whenever there are incidents that will occur, they are actually aware as to how they would react to those particular incidents. And moving forward, we're actually enhancing that already to even do red teaming and blue teaming exercises so that it's really a real world scenario that they get to defend on.
So sometime back, while answering the previous question, you spoke about the Zero Trust network, right? So what are the components of Zero Trust that you are actually trying to implement here in your organization?
So we're actually thinking of deploying SASE solution ZTNA so that we're actually limiting really and trusting no one to actually be able to authorize users into our network before granting them access.
Oh, lovely. Coming to ACE, you mentioned about contextualization, right? So today, data contextualization is one, or identity contextualization is one. But in this entire thing, how do you defend against a ransomware? Do you really go back to the basics, or are you looking at enhanced tools and technology to really circumvent the challenge here?
So earlier, there was a lot of discussion about zero trust, right? And I will relate that to our current discussion on ransomware. Whether it's zero trust or ransomware, it's not a single platform or solution. And when I say back to basics, there are a lot of things that you can do to defend yourself against ransomware, which many of you think it's either cliche, it's so basic, and you're already thinking about what are the latest complicated or sophisticated solutions that you can go. But you can actually start, again, I don't want to sound like it's a cliche, but you can start with the basics. Of course, I'd like to jump off from our earlier panel. They were talking about, Angel and Marlon were talking about strategy. in a world where you have finite resources, you don't have a lot of time, you have a fixed headcount, or you don't have a lot of people, everything has to be governed by a strategy so that you're able to manage your three pillars: people, process, technology. Now, once you've figured out how to defend your enterprise or your ecosystem, that is now the wellspring of insight. Because at least you know what will be your crown jewels. And from there, you cascade all the layers, and I'm talking about layered or defense in depth, all the layers that you need to defend. You begin with your perimeter, and then you go to your network, and then to your endpoints, and then to your applications, and then finally, before they can even get to your crown jewels, whether it's your intellectual property or your data, you've actually stopped them in any of these layers. Now, again, going back to the concept of going back to basics, one of the most underrated pillars of a good cybersecurity strategy is awareness training. In our group, we have a unit that's actually dedicated to that. We call that group ATUA, Awareness, Training, and User Adoption. All they do is drill in, day out, both to our cybersecurity personnel and to the larger enterprise, what cybersecurity or what a good cybersecurity culture and awareness is. Now, once you've done that, there are very low-hanging fruits that you can deploy. For example, 51% of all our threats are actually eliminated, and this is related to ransomware again. Most of the initial attack entry points for ransomware is business email compromise. If you deploy a cloud-based email security platform, in our case, it gets rid of 51% of our threats via email.
Interesting.
So that's a low-hanging fruit. Another is, again, you don't put all your eggs in one basket.
True.
Do network segmentation. That's basic, right? That's not a solution. That's not a platform. That's just common sense, right? And then there are the other things that you can also deploy. Again, low-hanging fruits. You have MFA, and back it up with a good policy which governs those who will be joining you, those who will be moving within your enterprise, and those who will be leaving. Again, that's not rocket science. We simply call it our joiner, mover, leaver policy. At any point in time, wherever you are in the enterprise, whether you are joining, you are moving, or you're leaving, your access privileges will be based on that. Again, that's zero trust, right?
Yeah.
But we don't call it by that name, right? So again, going back to basics is where you can actually lower or cut your costs, be smart about what you're deploying, not have overlapping solutions, and in the end, when you go back to management and to the board, you actually have a covenant with them. This is our strategy. This is what we are promising to you that we will deliver in exchange for what you are giving us in terms of funding us. And at the same time, this very same strategy is what you tell your cybersecurity people, hey guys, this is our covenant to management. And you can actually go down to the level of their personal scorecards. What do you do on a day-to-day basis in order to secure your enterprise?
Lovely. So going back to basics, I agree, is one thing, but I'm sure you would still have implemented advanced technologies in terms of your security operations centers or managing your managed service providers. So how do you really take care of that?
So one of our chief problems at the outset of the pandemic was that absolutely under no circumstances could we have an option where our SOC is not staffed 24/7, 365 days a year. So we were, cybersecurity people are basically paranoid people. So that paranoia served us well because prior to the actual order of the government for a lockdown, we were already anticipating a lockdown scenario. Metro Manila will be a ghost town. There's no travel. There's no commuting. How do we move our people, or how do we secure our SOC 24/7 operations? And I'm mentioning SOC, or if you can't have a full staffed SOC, at least a managed detection and response service. I'm mentioning this again within the context of ransomware because our earlier panel was talking about visibility. At any point in time, whether you're talking about files, processes, devices, or behavior, you should have people monitoring these.
True.
if you have a high-risk behavior monitored in any of your devices, your SOC can shut it down. So I'm saying that one of the crucial ingredients, I believe, and this is, again, a big ticket item, is an SOC or a managed detection and response item in your cybersecurity expense. It's a very big help because once you're able to have visibility over your assets, there should be either people or automated processes to help you manage or to help you or to give you an ability to use that visibility. That visibility will now allow you to act quickly, because a big part of our role in securing this critical infrastructure is our ability to keep down our time to own and time to contain. It's very important. There was a mention a while ago of one speaker that as you move across time, whether it's minutes or it's hours, the effect across your enterprise in terms of the propagation of the threat is exponential.
Yeah, true.
So the longer it is for you, the longer time it is for you to own or to identify the threat and then to contain it, will determine the kind of damage that can be inflicted on you. And in our case, we begin with the perception that any kind of compromise is unacceptable, because it will navigate from becoming a purely economic threat, because we're talking about a telco, to one that will have national security implications. Imagine millions of users being both deaf and blind because the telco has been brought down by a cyber attack.
Thanks a lot. Thank you everybody for your views. A few of the takeaways I believe from the panel discussion was we need to really go back to the basics, right, of how do we really set up the networks, have the right endpoint protection tools implemented to ensure that you have the right protection mechanisms there. And the most important thing that all of them are mentioning is about awareness and training for the end users, because that if the end user is trained and is aware of what he or she is doing, I think this can really be contained pretty well. So thanks a lot, guys. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you for being a wonderful audience, and happy lunch break now. Thank you.